First, let me introduce myself. My name is Rachel. I'm from the product support and education team here at Wellfound. I'm really excited. This is our 22nd Ask a Recruiter. So we hit a milestone just a couple weeks ago if you haven't joined us since. So that's exciting. We're really excited to have you here with us, Mary. I'm going to give Mary a proper introduction in just a minute after more people join. But today's topic is about what startups and open source companies really are looking for in technical talent. So we're really hoping it's helpful to you. And before we sort of launch into everything, I wanted to go over how questions work. So today is like a pure Q&A kind of session. We're going to start with intake survey questions to warm up. So these are questions that are directly from you when you signed up. And then I just want to make sure everyone knows what Wellfound is. This session is presented by Wellfound. We're a jobs marketplace. We've been around for over 10 years, formerly known as AngelList Talent. And we help you get hired by cutting edge startups, and now even bigger tech companies like enterprise tech companies still use our service, as they've grown. We've made over 8 million matches and have over 150,000 tech jobs in our system. And if you haven't yet checked us out, please do. People like myself and Alejandro, who's on the call with us today, are the people who help you if you have any questions along the way. Awesome. On to the good stuff. We have Mary here with us today. She's a seasoned recruiter currently working at DBeaver, a popular open source database management tool. She brings over a decade of recruiting experience, specializing in hiring for pre-Series A to Series C startups. Early in her career, Mary developed a passion for open source developer tools, which led her to recruit for companies like DBeaver, NGI, Temporal, and others. She's recruited software engineering and technical go-to-market roles at all levels throughout the US and globally. Her recruiting philosophy is built on transparency and clarity, two values that I also love. And she's passionate about guiding candidates through the hiring process and helping them find a great fitting role where they can do their best work. So thank you so much for being with us, Mary.
Yeah, I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, we'll just get started with the questions. So the first question that we had is about how to enter the job market after, a period of education. This question is from Manasa. She says, I'm currently a master's student graduating in December in 2025, and I'm actively applying for engineering and software engineering and backend roles, especially in open source companies and startups. And one of my main challenges is that I haven't received responses from recruiters, possibly due to my limited industry experience. What is the best way to approach recruiters or hiring managers when you're early on in your career and don't have much experience yet? It's sort of like a general call for how do I stand out when the market's this competitive? What do you think?
Yeah, honestly, I think kind of I go two different places with this question. The first is the problem could just be more timing. Startups and like smaller companies in particular are usually hiring for a specific need. So knowing that you're graduating in December, the problem could just be that they're not kind of ready to hire yet for someone who's starting in December and January. Like I would say startups typically like I love a 3-month head start before a company, wants a like X month is when we want to hire them, but realistically, it's usually like 6 weeks to 2 months. So you could find that as you get closer to December, your response rates are kind of going up. I wouldn't say like keep applying because not every company hires that way. Sometimes they could be hiring multiple roles, so they're more open to a later start date, but just kind of keep your response rates might change as the year goes on. I think they're kind of like this was a really interesting question because I think there could be like I really had to think about different ways to stand out. And one of the things that came to mind that I hadn't thought of previously was usually when people are in school, a lot of their resume, first of all, hopefully you have internships. Internships are so important, or previous work experience. If you're in your master's, you might also a lot of times schooling is based on projects, but I don't know if people like think about changing out the projects that they're talking about, their school projects on the resume to focus more on whatever that job is, right? Because there's a lot of different school projects, and if the job is more like a cloud engineer, right? Maybe kind of projects that have to do with those skills are a little bit more better than generic projects, right? And I think the other way early in career people can really stand out because early in career or even like career changes, I feel like a lot of the times it's more about kind of passion and soft skills is really utilizing kind of cover letters or application questions to showcase, hey, why are you really interested in this role or why are you interested in doing this job? You can apply that to like when you're trying to reach out to recruiters and hiring managers in other ways instead of just saying, hey, I applied. Maybe I applied because I really like X. So kind of finding different ways to really show, you know, why that's important to you, or kind of why they should kind of take the chance on you when maybe there's a lot of people graduating at the same time.
Oh, yeah, really good points. Thanks so much. So the next question we had was from Sidra, and it's about corporate and startup candidates. So they just wanted to know, like, how do you evaluate applicants who come from corporate versus startup backgrounds?
This one's a fun one because I see it go in both directions. I see big companies having concerns about small company experience and small companies having concerns about big company experience. From the startup perspective, I would say that we end up focusing a lot on like evaluating applicants a little bit too from the soft skills standpoint based on initiative. In some ways, they're really looking for people who want to contribute beyond just the day to day. Like, we currently look for people who want to help us build process and documentation and be a part of that because it's going to go faster if the whole team does it. It's just going to be better. They're really looking for people who kind of can deal with ambiguity, right? And I think you really, like, from a candidate standpoint, really need to think about a good answer if you're looking to make the shift around why. Like, you really need a good answer for, like, one of the questions that I really enjoy is where you go, why are you interested in a startup? And I think kind of sometimes when there are yellow or red flags, it's when people are like, oh, I don't love process, and I hate red tape. And you're like, well, startups still have those things, right? Like, it's not the wild wild west. It's still a company. So, like, really thinking through the, like, why is this different, and like having a very good answer around why you think you're gonna like enjoy that shift, I think is important. But I think it does come not only technical skills, but soft skills come into play a lot more kind of with startups.
Oh, yeah, that's really helpful to hear. We've had a lot of questions about making shifts from different backgrounds. So hearing what sort of not to focus in on and being more specific about why this company makes so much sense to me. Very cool. And then Alessandra has a question about technical skills. And this one I think is very relevant. So, how important is it to have experience in their specific stack, which I'm assuming means the companies?
Yeah. For the large majority of roles, really important. I would say for anything technical related, anything like engineering, support engineering, sales engineering, like the big pieces of the technical stack usually are really, really important. They really need people who can hit the ground running. So they really don't have a lot of time to ramp someone up on something new. Not to say that there isn't an acknowledgement that you can learn it, but just from a like timeline standpoint, the exceptions to this are like when companies, when a company's tech stack include things like Go or Scala or less common programming language, oftentimes they don't require it because then they wouldn't hire anyone. Like they wouldn't invite anyone, right? So, but even in those cases, they might say, hey, we need Go experience is first tier. Beyond that, they might really focus on languages where it'll be a really easy logical jump into it, right? So maybe it's not as easy to jump from Python to Go or it is from Java to Go, right? So there are cases where that isn't as important, but any like main tools in the tech stack, even from a cloud standpoint, can be really important. Minor tools, less so. On the go to market side, when you're talking about like marketing, recruiting, sales, they don't get so involved in the tech stack, right? Because like Salesforce and HubSpot are similar enough that most of the time they're not going to care. But on the technical side, it's usually quite important.
Yeah, that makes much sense. Okay, and then Tishka, I was saying it wrong, sorry about that. Pratiksha asks about technical interviews. So what type of interview format should I expect for open source or startup roles, technical, behavioral, or project based? And I'm gonna guess you might say some sort of combination here.
Yeah, all of the above, potentially. Yeah, definitely all of the above. Like soft skills, again, are usually a big part of the interview process for sure. Even if it's not like obviously a soft skills interview question, and it's more just about walking through like coding. They could be evaluating, how are you collaborating? How do you react if we suddenly shift priorities and say, let's add this in, right? So constantly behavioral, yeah, regardless of whether it's tagged as it or not. Technical, yes. I would say for engineering, it's a lot easier to do like a coding interview. or a design interview in an interview process. Sometimes companies offer both, right? Coding take home or coding interview, just to try to really get people to choose what they think they're going to be more successful at. Project based can happen in engineering, but I would say that's more common in kind of technical go to market roles, right? So, or just kind of go to market roles, to be honest. We, for example, have like a deal desk role where we had a little project. I've hired support engineers in the past where we have a little like email writing exercise. So, depending on the role and how it applies, might change a little bit. I would definitely anticipate either behavioral and technical, or behavioral and project based, kind of depending on the function of the role and how easy it is to apply that, for sure.
Yeah, and any tips for ways to prepare or anything that you recommend for candidates?
For all of these things. Yeah. I mean, I think that when an interview process is planned out, a recruiter should be able to kind of like answer questions. If you're like, hey, from a technical standpoint, is it more leak code based? Is it more real world examples? And hopefully kind of be able to provide you that information to know how to prepare, because it definitely will change. I would definitely ask them questions about what to expect, how to prepare. For project based, try not to go too deep into it. Like if they set a time expectation, try not to go beyond it. Mainly for your time, really, not for the other. For behavioral, I think the best thing is maybe just start thinking through kind of situations, right? Like companies do really love tell me about a time. So I'd like to just kind of practice in my head, like what if they were to ask me about a time I struggled to recruit on a role? What example would I give? And maybe the job description can guide a little bit. The company values that they post then can guide a lot on that, where you just kind of start thinking through situations and what you would like come up with. I struggle with the tell me about a time conversations a lot, because I feel like on the spot, those are so hard to answer, and so like trying to kind of think through some of those ahead of time, practicing with a friend. Um, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Those are great tips. I'm glad I asked and put you on the spot. Um, I like that, and also it's just a good reminder to always ask the recruiter, what to expect. I think a lot of people don't do that because they're nervous on that first screening call, and it's actually so valuable.
Yeah.
So, and then Steve has a question. It sort of falls into this idea of wearing many hats. He says, I'm someone that has fallen between the worlds of engineering and design. Now it feels as though I'm not being considered for either since I didn't specialize in one place. Any tips for moving forward?
Yeah. I have a lot of thoughts on this, and some of them probably work and some of them don't, depending on where you're going. But I've been in this situation before. Before I became a recruiter, I was a writer and an editor. And one of the ways I kind of so there are a few thoughts that I have. First, a startup could be a really good place for you because they are kind of wearing a lot of hats. However, even in a startup environment, interviews aren't necessarily built for like evaluating this kind of skill set, which makes it harder. So it can feel like, hey, companies are trying to fit you into a box and you don't fit into one box. And that definitely can be really frustrating. And it definitely takes a really good, well-oiled kind of company and recruiting process and recruiter to like really kind of see that value. Some more practical ways to deal with that is, I guess my first thought is, this feels kind of like almost a full stack question. My first thought is, are you better in one or do you prefer one? All right. Like maybe you can do engineering and design, but you really love engineering and you're happy to help with design. Then I would say, kind of, that should really be kind of how you focus in your resume, your LinkedIn, your roles, right? Where it's maybe, and in this case, I would actually recommend you probably have at least 3 different resumes. You might have a resume that's slightly more geared towards design, a resume that's slightly more geared towards engineering, and maybe a resume that's pretty equal both. And it's not like about making up skills or misrepresenting your skills, but like how you prioritize it. Because I think the most important thing for this is twofold. Helping a recruiter understand, why are you applying to this engineering role if you look like a designer? First, that can just be how you prioritize your resume. And the second part, this is where I bring in maybe a cover letter, or adding in something on an application question, or if it's available, to like just really make clear, hey, I really love engineering, this is my passion. I can also contribute here, but It is kind of hard sometimes when you get like a resume to engineering that looks really design and without context, it kind of feels like maybe you kind of like we're just kind of applying for some random reason. So like you need to find a way to make that really clear, whether that's in your like LinkedIn, whether that's in a cover letter, whether that's just in the like objective if you have one on your resume. And that's why it might be easier to just kind of have a few different templates that kind of cover all those possibilities, mainly so you don't have to like customize your resume every time, right? You kind of have a few to start with and then customize from there. Does that make sense? Hopefully. What do you think, Rachel?
Oh, I think it makes sense. I'm noticing also that Steve is here live, so maybe he can let you know if it makes sense if he wants to speak out loud. I don't know. Wait a second. Oh, okay. He said, "Thank you for your thoughts. It is helpful in the chat." So maybe you can't speak out loud right now. So yeah, that's great. And I like that idea also of emphasizing like how you tell your story to people, like making it clear. I think anything that will confuse recruiters or whoever's reviewing the resumes or application material probably will get confused by something that is a little bit gray or ambiguous. And so you help it by taking those steps. Makes so much sense to me.
And it definitely helps to use a friend for that purpose who maybe isn't an engineer or a designer, maybe a friend from a totally different industry or totally different, like they're just different. And kind of using them to look at your resume and tell you like what's the impression you get from this, right?
Yeah.
And that can help guide because the recruiter is going to be coming at your resume from a similar standpoint. Right.
I think that's such good advice. Probably in general, that's really good advice for everybody to take at least once in their application prep, like
Yeah.
journey. Wonderful. Okay, great. I'm glad Steve was here for that live. So this next question we kind of added on because you were like, oh, I want to answer this because it's a little bit not totally on this topic and more general, but I think it's an important one. So how do diversity questions work? So do diversity questions like gender, ethnicity, race, disability, etc., really matter? I know companies write that it will not affect the application, but do recruiters look at that and at that information to maybe fill out a quota and hire candidates that are actually not qualified or didn't do well in the interviews? The last part I'm a little confused by, but Viraj, I think it's a really helpful question to kind of illuminate. How does that actually work on your end?
Yeah, and I had a lot of thoughts about this question at the same time. And I hopefully I'll do them in a not quite descending order. First of all, a recruiter might not even be able to access your answers to those questions. Like that information around kind of like personal, private information around work authorization, salary, EEOC is usually locked down at an admin level. So the chance that a recruiter can actually see how you answer those questions, depending on how it's set up in their company, to be fair, is like I would say, not a guarantee. Hiring managers, interviewers, other people definitely can't access that information for sure. First of all, so I don't think it impacts it from that standpoint. They're not looking at that information and deciding, do I talk to this person or not based on that. A lot of the times, when companies have that, it could be because they have required legal reporting. If they have government contracts and things, I don't know where we stand on that anymore. But it could be that. It could be they want to look at, hey, do do we want to guide what kind of resources, tools we buy next year based on, how we want our hiring to go forward. And even then, again, it's super anonymized. Usually, it's just anonymized reports. It's not usually specific to can. I don't even know how you would pull that specific to candidates, like in our system, to be honest. Although in the systems that I've set up, I should say. I've never seen a card company. None of the companies I've ever worked for have ever hired a candidate who's not qualified, regardless of the situation. I think that I think most companies recognize. I would hope that that is a very short-sighted approach to what can become a long-term success issue for both the company and the candidate. Because if you think about if you're hiring someone who's not qualified onto your team, then they're not going to produce as well as the rest of the team. So you could get behind on company features, right? That and especially in a startup, hitting those kind of deadlines is so important to the survival of the startup, right? And keeping to them and releasing those features on time. And for like then, so that's on the company success side. On the candidate success side, if they're not qualified for the role, they're not going to be producing, they're not going to be doing well in performance reviews. They're probably not going to be there for very long. Now you have a company reputation issue. So I've never seen this happen. Do recruiters sometimes have like goals around, hey, we do want to make sure that we have candidates, we have applicants, we have people coming from different backgrounds and different education and different thought? Yes, I've never seen that applied to the success of a recruiter though. If that makes sense. It's usually like, I mean, in some ways, you have to have a goal to make something important, right? So it's kind of from that standpoint. But if you think about startups and open source, like they exist because, you know, they are trying to disrupt something or they've found a gap in a system. And so they really generally value diversity of thought and background, right? Because that's, if they all thought the same way, they would think that maybe they didn't need to disrupt that industry, right? So they're usually kind of more looking for that, right? They don't want the group think like bias status quo. They want people to come from different backgrounds and contribute different thoughts, because it's going to make the product better, in the end, and hopefully more around it.
Yeah, I love that answer, and it does clarify a lot. I think a lot of people don't know what those questions are for, and I've always heard the same answer that it's like litigious. They're not going to actually be able to view that when they're making those decisions, basically, which is relieving in some ways, I guess. But I'm just working on some clips from some founders that are kind of speaking to exactly what you just said, which was that like looking at diverse backgrounds, even just like sort of what company a person has worked at before in that kind of just like small scale way of diversity is that it can lead to like people who are thinking differently, who are maybe hungrier to build something, lots of excitement comes from working with people from different walks of life and
Exactly.
experiences. Cool. Well, I hope that answered his question. Now we're on live questions, which is exciting. I do have some other questions that we've outlined too, if we get through the live questions, but I'm going to open up my little viewer here so I can see anyone who wants to raise their hand. If you want to, we welcome hearing your voice. And I'll start by looking at the chat and going in order of who we've got here. So the first question, I think, let me just make sure I'm not missing any. Yeah, is from Salam. They asked, oh, wait, Salam, do you want to ask out loud? Maybe not. Okay, I'm going to read it out. They say, I graduated recently and have been actively applying, but haven't been able to secure a role yet. From your perspective as a recruiter, what are the most common reasons new graduates don't get selected? And what can I focus on to improve my chances? This kind of overlaps with the question that you answered earlier, but if you've got anything else you want to say.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm kind of, in this case, I'm assuming that you're applying for roles that are, kind of, let's say SD1 or SD2, like equivalent to your experience. Because I will say that the often kind of when it comes to startups, there might not be as many opportunities for like new grads, right? So if you are finding those opportunities, ways to stand out. Yeah, I mean, I think similar things that I kind of said in the last question. I mean, I do think that when it comes to kind of open source side of things, you know, um, kind of being able, like, I do think that passion for open source, if you're contributing to open source projects, can actually kind of help from that standpoint. I don't know if that makes like a huge difference on this on the senior side, but for new grads, it can be one way to stand out, right? If you're working on contributing to open source projects, that can be a really big difference compared to you and maybe a similar graduate from your company. And again, you might try really kind of similar thing to the projects, but even how you describe your internship, or like really, I think where new grads could maybe stand out a little bit is finding ways to bring out the experience from their education, their projects, their internships that are really relevant to what that engineering or what that company is doing. That would be the way to stand out, because everyone's going to come from the similar education background. All right. So at that point, it's really a matter of like, hey, I also did this project, that was, kind of doing APIs, right? And this is like an API engineer, fill in the blank. Like finding ways to really kind of like emphasize that might help, um, for sure. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, awesome. And then the next question I have is from Sanu, but I wonder if you want to read it out loud or say it out loud, maybe to specify a little bit more about um, what kind of job you're looking for when you're asking this question.
Yes, of course. So My question is, what advices would you give someone who is from non-technical background looking for a job in the technical field? So I have a bachelor's in neuroscience and I'm looking for a job as AI agent engineer. I have done boot camps and I have certifications in AI engineering and I have been looking for a job, but it's been very hard to find one.
This is actually, I had a lot of experience with this early in my career because that was when data science was really like starting to take off. So it was a lot of PhDs coming from what were effectively science PhDs, but really technical PhDs. And a lot of the struggle they had was similar to my like thought on having a friend read it. A lot of the struggle they had was reframing how they're talking about what they learned in their degree. All right, because for example, like a experimental physicist might have actually done a lot of programming and coding, but if a recruiter isn't familiar with that, all they see is the physics. So I'd really emphasize the technical skills that I actually don't know anything about neuroscience, so I'm kind of assuming it might be similar. But really emphasize any of the technical skills that you've gained, whether around engineering or analyzing data or whatever the case may be. And then think of ways like, how is that neuroscience degree going to help with that AI piece, right? Is that kind of more soft skills and understanding how the brain works, like, or kind of the thought process. So I really like take a really hard look at how you're describing what your neuroscience degree was and like what it taught you and how that applied, and trying to make sure that's very, very obvious to a recruiter, because you don't want a recruiter to see neuroscience and then be like, well, this is an engineer. Science has nothing to do with engineering. So definitely rely on friends, and you might give them both. You might give them a job description and your resume and see what do they say, but you really need to make it very clear like why you have the transferable skills. A cover letter could also help with that. I'm not, TBD, like how that works, but it really has to be really obvious to them when you're making a change like that, because they probably have no experience with it.
Hope that helps, Sanu. Let us know if you have any follow-up questions.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, great. Awesome. I love how unique that question was. So just take a look. Chung, do you want to ask your question out loud? I mean, it's kind of a basic one. I could ask it, but I want to give you the opportunity.
Yeah, I just want to know like what is the best way to find company that have product open source and what is the best way to apply for them. So,
So like how to find those
Okay.
roles, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, Google, ChatGPT. So one of the ways I do it, because I love working for open source companies, is I will start just kind of Googling open source startups in X or open source, and just kind of start building company lists and kind of just keeping track of their openings. There are a number of like job aggregating websites specifically geared towards open source. Then you have like job aggregating websites like Wellfound that are specifically geared towards startups. So like just from a practical sitting at your computer way, like that's probably the easiest. I would still do like LinkedIn and things like that, but like if you really want to target, I would you could kind of focus on those things. Um, Depending on how much time and effort you want to put into it, you could also find open source meetups near you. You could start attending open source conferences and just seeing which companies are sponsoring them. Like there's also a lot of engineering teams out there, even in big companies that you wouldn't think are open source companies, like for example Amazon, who might have like open source engineering teams in specific ways, or Uber. So it can be both. There might not be like an obvious open source, like there could be less obvious open source teams in non-open source companies. And then I would kind of just start building a company list. I actually just, because I've been in open source long enough, I usually just go through my LinkedIn connections to see where all the people I loved working with at different open source companies are working at now. And they're typically also working in open source, because I think like once you kind of get into open source, people really like it. So then I build a company list from that too. So like there are a lot of different ways to do it.
Oh yeah, I love that deep hunt, sort of figuring out how to scour things. I also just put in the chat, we have like a page that it's a signed out page. I don't know if you see it. Oh no, you'll see if you're signed in. that just lists like open source companies that are hiring right now in 2025. So it should be active companies. Hopefully that's helpful to people too. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Great. And then Harry has a question. Do you want to ask it out loud, Harry?
Sure. So I was wondering about how much impact does an employment gap when it comes to kind of like moving on to the interview stage due to real life circumstances. I've unfortunately had about a 1 year employment gap, and recently I've been hearing back less from companies who applied in general. So I was wondering if how much impact does this employment gap have on my chances, or and like what are the things I can do to kind of like help out, kind of counteract this or alleviate this?
Yeah. I would like to say it shouldn't have an impact because I just think since COVID and the downturn and everything, like there are so many reasons nowadays why people have a gap that I really try hard to make sure that my managers for the past number of years like aren't kind of falling back into that there's a gap or why did they leave and not have a job, right? Because so many people have been impacted involuntarily. Just it seems like the market has not settled in a very long time. So I would like to say that it shouldn't. It could. Yes, it could. How to get around that, or not, maybe not how to get around that, but how to start, changing that conversation. One of the ways that I do like to see, because I think one of the concerns around a gap can often just be like, how are you keeping your skills current? So this is where something like, depending on if it's more engineering related, starting to contribute to open source can kind of help with that. Maybe taking kind of not like college courses, but like kind of showing kind of maybe not maybe free certificates or doing coursework or finding ways or like starting to build your own project. So I think that is most important to address the have you gotten rusty kind of in a year, and then kind of just having a conversation, like having, so that I would find a way to do on your resume or in a cover letter, fill in the blank. Um, and then I would say, really kind of when a recruiter asks you, hey, what have you been up to in a year? That's really what they're looking to hear in an interview. Like, how are you kind of keeping up? You know, what are you trying to do to, make sure that you're staying abreast? I actually find it really helpful. I mean, I actually had this conversation with a recruiter recently, and we didn't end up like finishing the conversation, which I'm regretting right now. But I actually find it really helpful when people list on their resume like impacted by X% layoff or team limited, just because I think it does help like very early on get to the point of like, hey, life happened. It wasn't necessarily your fault. It wasn't performance related. I do actually find those things helpful sometimes, especially if it's happened to you a few times in a row. And even before COVID, this was kind of a problem in startups because startups go under, right? So you could join a startup, it could go under in a year, and then you join another one. And if it doesn't, like, especially people who take risks on pre-seed startups. So I do actually, in some ways, and you'll see it on my LinkedIn too, I kind of note where acquisitions happened. I note where kind of companies closed because I do think it at least, kind of from the start on that first resume read sets a very specific like startups happening. If you don't anticipate, like if a recruiter is not anticipating that a startup could have closed, like then it's a little silly. Right? So
Oh, those are some great tips. I hope that was helpful. And it's also helpful to hear that acknowledging like sort of what happened to the startup that you worked at prior on your resume is something that recruiters are keen on knowing too.
yeah, I think it helps a lot when people are worried about it. It looks like I'm a job hunter, but or job hopper, sorry, but
Yeah.
this team got eliminated and this startup closed, and so it just kind of helps nix that from the start.
Yeah. And like maybe a recruiter who works with people from startups or hiring for startups might think it could be that, but it's great to like actually clarify it. That makes so much sense.
All right. Would it be okay if I were to add some additional questions then in the topic while we're on the topic?
Sure. Yeah, I think we've got enough time for I think the other questions that are up. Sure.
So while we're on the topic of like adding these like reasons for like layoffs or other possibility in the resume, where should I best put these kind of blurbs in my resume? Should it be in there under like under the summary, or would it be under like the one of the job experiences?
It depends on how you have your resume formatted. I don't necessarily think the location matters. Probably I would say somewhere more obvious is going to help, right? So if you have kind of company, title, years, and then maybe like company acquired or, impacted by layoff, like I wouldn't like bury it because then in skimming they might miss it. So, but it really depends on how you have your resume formatted.
Great. Thanks for asking your question, Harry.
Thank you.
Okay. The next question that we have is from Jovin. I think you kind of answered this already, but maybe let's ask it quickly for them. They say that I'm a student graduating in fall 2025. Do startups typically look for an immediate hire or should I start applying now? Although fall 2025 is very soon. What month? Yeah.
I I don't think there's any harm in applying now. But I do think startups typically are looking at an immediate hire. An immediate hire could still take 2 months in their process. Keep that. So I don't necessarily think it hurts you to apply ahead of time because maybe they have planned out. They know in December they're going to hire. So I don't think it hurts you to do it. I just think as you get closer to your graduation date, within 2 to 3 months of your graduation date, you might see a better uptick in responses for sure. Right? Because I do think that I, when a candidate tells me, "Hey, I can't start for 4 months because X fill in the blank," there's a lot of different reasons I've heard. I'm like, that's great, but like we really need someone to start now, either because the work is behind or someone left the team and it's gonna be really hard for the rest of the team until they have someone else contributing or whatever. So they're much more like immediate hire for sure.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. And then Isidra, do you want to ask your question out loud? Let's see.
Yeah, sure. So I had a question related to Gen AI because it's like a trending topic nowadays. So some people suggest that having that in a resume make you stand out because it's um, like some startups actively look for candidates who highlight Gen AI skills on their resumes because, or is it like just a nice to have skill? What is your take on that?
I think it depends on what the startup is. If
Okay.
it's a Gen AI startup related, yeah, probably. Or if they're building like a Gen AI team, yeah, that's going to be important. Like, you know, in the companies that I've worked for more recently, we don't do a lot with Gen AI. So I think the only downside to like over highlighting Gen AI in your resume, if you're applying to a database management company, where it's not a Gen AI company, is you might fall into the trap of, this candidate really is passionate about Gen AI. I don't understand why they applied. We don't do that. Like, so I would say it really kind of depends on what the company is. I think as a broad piece of advice, I wouldn't apply it broadly. That is not to say that it is not a good piece of advice, depending on where you're applying. But I wouldn't say it would make a difference for me looking at a candidate based on what we
Okay.
do.
Sounds fair. Thank you.
Awesome. And we've got a question from Kasang here. Do you want to ask out loud? I'm excited about this one.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a recent economics graduate with an operations internship experience at an early stage startup. They were a marketplace. And when I was applying for jobs, I noticed a lot of customer success associate roles. And so far, I've applied to them and I got 3 interviews. And I was just wondering what kind of path could this role lead to? And what are some roles you see growing fast in this space beyond engineering?
So I'm sorry, I do want to go back really quick. You said your degree is in what?
Economics.
Okay, but you've gotten really into customer success. And do you want so this is
Yeah.
gonna be kind of a little bit of a TBD question. Do you know kind of how you might want to like do you want your career to grow more technical or do you want it to be more customer like people facing?
Yes, my long-term goal is definitely to enter product management. I think that's like a career path that many people follow. So I was just wondering how I can build my skills to that since right now I don't have the necessary technical skills, I believe, to get there.
I mean, I would say that depends. All right. So when making career transitions, sometimes it's easiest to find kind of like what is kind of the closest, what's the word, not transitional, transferable skills to make the jump. And sometimes, like, from that standpoint, if you spend the next 5 years in customer success for, let's say, cloud native companies, and you're kind of figuring, you do need to gain those product skills somehow, whether that's through like courses or just finding opportunities within your companies to start like really kind of gaining those product skills. So first, I would say you definitely want to start finding ways to gain those skills, right? And then you just might find as you go on that if you've been at customer success companies in cloud native space, that's not specific enough, but we're going to stick with it, and you kind of gain those product pieces, you might actually have an easier time moving into product management in the cloud native space, even if that's not where you ultimately want to be 5 years from then. Say 5 years from then, you want to be in security. But like you need to figure out the easy transition point. And then once you get that first, like really it's a transition point that's the hardest. Once you get in that first job, after that, it's a lot easier to go, where you might ultimately want to go. But I would focus more on like customer success is not a bad transition into product in my mind, because product to me is a lot about building products, right? And you have to think about the user, and you have to think about the customer, and you have to think about the internal pieces. So customer success, actually, I don't know if I've seen someone do it, but I actually think that could be a really great transferable skills. I think right now you need to think about, now how do I gain those product skills as a part of customer success, whether that's through education or just having a discussion with your manager and being able to take on kind of things a little bit more related to that. So you got to think about that transition.
Okay, thank you. And I have a follow-up on that. Because I'm juggling between operations and customer success, which one of these two do you think is better to transition into product?
What kind of operations?
Like business operations, like general within a startup. So between these two roles as a entry level.
I don't know if I can answer that well. I'm not gonna lie. I've only done one product management, kind of hire in the past 4
Okay.
years. So I would say like a recruiter who's much more familiar with what those profiles look like. I could see both being really good depending on where you want to go in product management. Like I could see the customer aspect of customer success being like a really great transition, again, depending on what that final product is. And I can also see the ops side and business ops and understanding how the business needs to run, how the roadmap needs to run, also being really transferable. And I don't know enough to really kind of like advise you on which is better, unfortunately.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Awesome. Very interesting question. And like good luck with everything, Kasang.
Yeah.
Uh okay, Maria's got a question. Do you want to ask it out loud, Maria? Are you still here?
Yep, sure. Thank you. Hi. So my main question is, I'm a release manager with TPM experience, and the more I'm looking into startups roles and into open source roles, the less I'm seeing anything TPM related. So do you think it's just because they believe their processes are not mature enough and they are not ready for TPMs, or what's your thoughts?
Yeah. Probably the former. I'd say usually a lot of times I don't think you probably need as many project managers as you might need, or program managers as you might need engineers. So typically you're going to have a smaller team. In the beginning, when startups are really kind of growing and launching in those first
Mhm.
couple stages, potentially they really rely on leadership to provide that. And so until leadership gets like kind of crazy busy, they might, not go. So I think probably more likely it's not that they don't believe in it or they don't need it, but it's a matter of kind of their processes growing complex enough that they're ready to say, hey, we need to dedicate the resources to having one person do this. And, they could hire that ahead of time if they're like really kind of thinking ahead. They could be hiring that because it's become a pain point. There's a lot of different ways that they get there that can impact how early on they do it.
Got it. Thank you. Just a follow-up question. Do you think it's reasonable to go to some of the like startups asking, hey guys, I know you're not hiring for this position, but maybe you will be looking in the future. Does it make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it ever hurts keep in mind that, depending on who you're reaching out to on LinkedIn, maybe they don't check their LinkedIn very often. Like you might not get a response, but I don't think that getting on someone's radar like ever hurts, right? From that standpoint. And you could also explore, I know this is very different because it's recruiting. You could also explore kind of recruiting agencies that specialize in program management or specialize in startups and getting on their radar. Like there's a lot, I don't think it hurts. No.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your answer.
Yeah.
Awesome. Great questions. So I don't have any more questions in the chat, but I have a few others that we had outlined. And I think I'm just looking at who's actually on the call to see if they match anyone. I think we have a question that was from David about, well, David, do you want to ask the question that you wrote into maybe you don't remember it. I can read it out also. I'm going to read it out loud. So, what is the best approach for someone who has been an executive but wants to switch to an IC role? In my experience, I'm either overqualified or can't solve coding problems fast enough. So, that's an interesting problem. What do you think, Mary?
Yeah. I think one of those has a very practical solution in that on your free time, I would just, even if leak code isn't maybe what I would just start finding ways to practice coding and speeding up and doing it. Like that is at least one kind of practical way you can kind of impact that last piece. So I would say from that standpoint, that would be a good use. And it's something I also recommend to people when they are kind of managers and get away from the technical and want to get back into it. You just kind of have to start practicing, whether that's leak code or whatever the other platforms are that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. The overqualified part, this is where you probably do need to spend extra time explaining your story. I don't think it's that people think that you would be overqualified. I think it's that companies worry that maybe you just want a job and you're not actually going to be happy and then you're going to leave because you really wanted to be a manager or maybe or kind of things like that, right? So I think this is where you really need to make it clear somewhere in your resume why you want to make that change, why it's important to you. Like, hey, I kind of grew into management. I love IC. I miss IC work. I'm really looking for that. You might also have to take a pay cut too, right? So they might be worried that you're going to be like super, like when you're doing any sort of career change, you have to be ready for the pay difference, whether that's good or bad. Like hopefully it's good, but sometimes to change a career, you do kind of have to take a step back. So I think practicing is really important. And I think really finding a way in your resume, in your cover letter, in your LinkedIn to kind of emphasize why you want to make that change. Because I will admit, like again, when I haven't talked to someone and I'm just looking at a resume, when I see a resume, let's say of the director of engineering, and I go to their LinkedIn, because I do often go to a person's LinkedIn simply because LinkedIn always formats things exactly the same way. And resumes have a lot of different formatting. I have no particular preference on resume formatting, by the way, but sometimes it's easier if I'm reading 50 resumes at a time to like read it in LinkedIn if you have your LinkedIn filled out. If not, I'll go back to the resume. But the long story short of this was if you're kind of like in your resume, first I would try to emphasize those skills that might still be IC related in your roles, kind of like we had talked about before. B, if your LinkedIn says open to work and you only give management roles as what you're interested in, and there's no IC there, then I'm going to wonder, you really want to be an IC or you're just kind of looking for a job. And with startups, I think with any company, but especially with startups, like a hire that leaves, in 4 months, in a year, like a hire that doesn't work out can really, really like impact it a lot. So they really want to feel like, barring any, unforeseen, situations, that you're going to kind of come on board and be happy, doing this role for 2, 3, however many years. So you really need to get ahead of this is why I'm interested in being an IC and why it's important to me. And I've certainly seen people do that successfully. But you do need to get ahead of that concern of, is it something you really want or not? It's just something.
Oh yeah, he is here. So he said, makes sense. Thank you. So that's great. Yeah, I guess that's another like call to tell your story fully and get ahead of it. I think it's a really good thing to use as like a North Star.
Yeah. And I know that sometimes we say like recruiters don't read cover letters or recruiters don't read objectives. Like, honestly, I will always look at those things. I will admit if the cover letter is super generic and there's like not necessarily anything that's really telling me your story why, I might not sit there and read sentence for sentence like every single piece of it and like absorb it. Right. But you can start looking at those things to see, hey, are they trying to tell their story, or is this just kind of like a section of their resume? I think that's where objectives go wrong sometimes, is it's just like I get a lot of objectives from candidates that don't match the role in the slightest. Right. And at which point, so I think it really kind of has to, like, it should really work for you. It shouldn't just be a placeholder.
Got it. Yeah, it needs to be thoughtful, right? Like, and apply to it, I guess. Um, okay, I think it's a good time to wrap up. It's 5 minutes to the end, so I'm just gonna go through just a couple of things. This was awesome, Mary. I really love how much care you took in explaining and like thinking back on your experience to answer these questions.
And I just want to thank everyone for their questions, by the way. I didn't say that in the beginning or during, but they were also really great questions. And I hope it was helpful, and just, kind of keep going with your passion, and hopefully it'll work out.
Yeah, I'm sure it was helpful. I think you answered the questions really well and with so much experience, and like I definitely learned a lot of things. In like I said, I've been on 22 of these, so that means that there's something unique and new here. And yeah, so we've been running these. We're gonna keep running them. We have a Discord now where people are able to ask questions. I'm gonna invite Mary to it too if she wants to join. And even some other recruiters have popped in there, so you might even get a question answered by a recruiter, but it's more about like skill sharing, talking through the process. We have a channel for profile and like resume reviews, so like kind of peer reviews, but I also make sure to always look at any of the ones that are put in there and give my advice too. So if you just like want someone to look at something before you submit it, feel free to utilize that. Alejandro popped that into the chat for us. And then he's also going to pop in the chat a survey. First of all, thank you all so much for coming. It's great to have you on this call and to have such thoughtful questions come through. The survey really helps me know if this is effective, if there's any improvement points. Feel free to also like make suggestions for topics you'd really love to get handled on one of these calls, or specific kinds of recruiters you would love to talk to. I'm constantly, trying to engage with recruiters to see if they're interested, and I can like kind of focus on things that are actually going to be helpful for people who are joining these calls. So please do that. It also gives you an opportunity to add your email so that I always send you an invitation for these. So if you really want to make sure you don't miss it, that's a good way to not miss it. Yeah. And then the last thing is that next week we have another Ask a Recruiter. It's a little bit different than this one. It's about GTM and business roles for high growth startups. So if you're at all, maybe I'm trying to remember, let me look at the names here. Because saying you're working in customer success, it would be something like that. I'm just going to cover roles like that and go to market roles that are a little bit more about client facing stuff. So feel free to sign up for that if you want to join us. I also posted that in our LinkedIn. You should be able to sign up that way too. So it'd be lovely to see you. That's on Tuesday, not on Wednesdays. These are normally on Wednesdays or Thursdays, but it's a Tuesday one. All right. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you so much for joining us. I can't tell you enough how grateful we are that you're able to join us today. And thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of the week.
Thank you, guys.